Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Thursday, January the 23rd, 2014. Now, our top story tonight is a reminder from the Syrian Electronic Army that CNN has been serving as nothing more than a propaganda arm for the Obama administration in this buildup for war in Syria. They took over their Twitter feed and they put out some interesting tweets. Said Obama bin Laden, the Lord of Terror, is brewing lies that the Syrian state controls al-Qaeda. He says, don't forget, al-Qaeda is al-Qaeda, funded, armed, and controlled. And of course, that's exactly what Paul Joseph Watson was talking about in his article on INFOWARS today, that al-Qaeda is the best enemy that money can buy. He points out that recent reports that al-Qaeda militants have taken over parts of Iraq serve as a stark reminder that the U.S. has for decades played a crucial role, both directly and indirectly, aiding the spread of terrorists around the Middle East and North Africa as a Machiavellian tool of neo-colonialism, creating enemies as we need them. He says the reemergence of al-Qaeda in Iraq emphasizes how the U.S.'s near 9-year occupation of the country, during which hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, along with thousands of U.S. troops, were killed, was a colossal failure. And we've had congressmen, we've had Ted Cruz, as well as Dennis Kucinich talk about how we don't want to be al-Qaeda's Air Force. It's not a secret, even though the people who are reporting this CNN hack of the hack of the CNN Twitter feed, even though they're scoffing at people calling al-Qaeda Obama's army and talking about how he's a lord of terror, that's exactly what has been happening. And it's no secret. Both Democrats and Republicans have been saying this. It's no longer anything that they're even trying to hide. And he points out here, this goes all the way back to 9/11. He points out at the bottom of the article, he says, barely weeks before 9/11, former members of al-Qaeda, who subsequently joined the Kosovo Liberation Army, were airlifted out of Macedonia by U.S. paratroopers, and as FBI translator Sibel Edmonds had revealed, the U.S. maintained intimate relations with bin Laden all the way until the day of September 11th. We see a Harvard professor speaking in China. He's an expert on China, and he said that he's warning of a devastating China-Japan war. He said there's simmering anger in China that's highlighted by Japan's historical revisionism, which refuses to accept responsibility for the Second World War in their textbooks and schools. And he says, there's also the dispute over these islands. And then he also points out how the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe just recently visited a shrine in Tokyo honoring 14 war criminals who were subsequently executed for war crimes by the Allies. Now, of course, remember that waterboarding was one of those crimes for which we executed Japanese war criminals. But we brought over a lot of war criminals, both Nazi and Japanese war criminals, to the United States as part of Project Paperclip. And we're now seeing fallout from that from Army veterans who were then experimented on by these very same Nazis. In an article by Adon Salazar, says the Army continues to cover up secret experimentation 65 years later. They've got a lawsuit that was filed 5 years ago, still dragging through the courts because the DOD and the U.S. Army are attempting to delay a court order that would force them to provide certain notice to Vietnamese veterans, disclosing the extent to which they'd been secretly used as test subjects for experimentation. Now, this lawsuit says that with the help of Nazi scientists recruited through Project Paperclip, the Army and the CIA used at least 7,800 veterans as human guinea pigs at the Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland alone. That's just at one site they used 7,800 people. And of course, these are experiments that are part of MK Ultra, Operation Bluebird, Pandora, Monarch, all these familiar terms. Anybody that knows anything about the history of the CIA, the dark history of the CIA, things that came out during the Church Committee hearings in the 1970s. And the lawsuit goes on to say that the U.S. government sought drugs to control human behavior, cause confusion, promote weakness or temporary loss of hearing and vision, and many other effects. Now, when we look at what the Japanese government did and what they're being criticized for by the Chinese, that they would build a monument to honor war criminals, what did the U.S. do? We built a bureaucracy so that they could continue with their criminal behavior, continue with their experimentation on other humans. But this time they were experimenting on American soldiers, college volunteers, and of course, prisoners that we have here in the United States. And we have more than any other country. We see a lot of reports coming out of very violent revolution going on there, fighting in the streets. It looks like some kind of a post-apocalyptic scene. They've created their own versions of makeshift riot gear. Take a look at some of these things they've got here. Motorcycle helmets they're using, shields, clubs that they've made. They've even got slingshots, catapults, trebuchets. Both the police and the rioters are throwing Molotov cocktails at each other. And we've had hundreds of people injured on both sides. We've had at least 5 protesters killed. One has been allegedly killed by a police sniper. This is amazing. Why do these people want to get into the EU so bad? Well, the answer is that they don't necessarily want to get into the EU as badly as they want to get away from Russia. 2 generations ago, they suffered from something called the Holodomor. Now, this was actually a Soviet genocide in the Ukraine. This was talked about by a man named Raphael Lemkin, who actually coined the term genocide. And he used Stalin's genocide against the Ukraine as a definition of what genocide was, a perfect example of it. And he said the Soviet genocide in the Ukraine followed a 4-pronged attack. Now, here's the 4 prongs that they did, and look and see if this sounds familiar to what's going on in America today. Number 1, they took out the intellectual leadership. Number 2, they co-opted the churches. They said, you either become loyal to the Russian government or we're going to shut you down. The third thing they did was they destroyed the food supply, and that was the main way that they killed most of the people, was with a horrific famine in the Ukraine. And the last thing he did was he fragmented the Ukrainian people by adding to the Ukraine other people from outside the area. This is exactly what we see happening here. And if we don't want to see these kind of post-apocalyptic pictures happening here, we need to do everything we can to keep these kinds of scenes from happening in the U.S. Now, if it happens here, it's going to be something called democide, where the government kills the people. It's not going to be directed at any particular ethnic group or nationality. It'll be against everyone. So we all need to join to make sure this doesn't happen.
We're on the march. The empire's on the run. And the INFOWARS army is standing strong. Wake up your family, friends, and neighbors and break the matrix at INFOWARSstore.com. Learn the truth and spread the message of liberty with the world's most comprehensive collection of books and documentary films. Maintain a healthy metabolism and energize your body to perform at peak health with Survival Shield Nascent Iodine. Protect your family and be prepared with survival foods and emergency preparedness kits. And now you can drink safe water with your own ProPure water filtration system, which removes fluoride and other harmful chemicals from your family's water supply. Save 10% with the promo code WATER. So join the revolution. INFOWARSstore.com.
See the rest of the nightly news at our sister YouTube channel, The InfoWarrior, or become a member of PrisonPlanet.tv and help us take the message of freedom and liberty to the next level. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to this channel.